Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to this LGA Spending Review discussion. I'm Samira Ahmed. I work presenting a lot of arts programmes, mainly at the moment, including Front Row, which has given me quite an interesting perspective on the impact of local authority funding and how it impacts some of the things that we used to take for granted. But also, you may know, I've spent many years in news. I used to work at Channel 4 News, and I think it's quite interesting as a journalist thinking about how much we do and don't talk about what's going on in local authority funding, because it is where so many citizens meet their day-to-day needs. I know as well today we're talking about things like off-rolling on the news, where all the implications of children with needs which are not being met in school, who are then being put out, which are having to be picked up by local authorities. The whole picture is connected. I'll quickly talk you through a bit of housekeeping and then about our panel and then how we're going to run things. First of all, there's a fire safety thing in your handouts, and I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone who works in local authorities to take their fire safety seriously. So there's no alarm schedule, so just be aware if you hear the sounds, we need to take it seriously. There is a hashtag for this discussion if you are going to tweet about it, which is #CouncilsCan. And there's also the hashtag Smith Square debate for all these events. And there's information you can see on the screen about how to access the Wi-Fi, so do take a moment to do that. As I'm sure you'll all appreciate, it's a busy and always complicated day in Westminster, so we've had a couple of changes. First of all, Layla Moran apologised that she's not able to come today, but Baroness Pinnock very kindly has stepped in. Liz Truss is coming, but because of scheduling with her diary, she'll be joining us more like 5 o'clock. And the other difference is that Anneliese Dodds is caught up in business in the House, but is also trying to join us as soon as we can. So my plan is to introduce today's discussion, introduce our first two speakers, who will each speak for about 5 minutes, and then we can actually start taking questions and have a discussion going in the room and take our other speakers as they come. Do think about questions you'd like to ask, and we'll have some microphones to bring you. But I thought I'd just do a bit of my own, sort of like my journalist take on the dilemma that I know you all face. We're nearly a decade into the severe spending cuts that have been affecting local authority. And the long-term impacts are so, well, I would describe them as world-changing because they change the world that people are growing up in. Services, I keep hearing, are cut to the bone. Local authorities are merging, creating larger unitary bodies. Do they represent people better when we're always being told about local power and local decision-making? I hear from so many local services about how the goodwill of volunteers is not an endlessly renewable source, especially years after volunteers have taken over some of these services. The level of commitment is inevitably lower than paid staff, let alone the expertise. At Front Row recently, I was lucky enough to be invited in to see the House of Commons Library. And I was so impressed by the way it's run. It has professional librarians, it has all these amazing services. A lot of that material is generated for the public to be able to access too. But I couldn't help thinking, why are MPs worthy of this, but not local citizens, where their libraries are closing? The amateurisation of professional library services, which is a reality in so many of our local authorities. Arts professionals, which is a world I spent a lot of time in on Front Row, do their best. But the regions just don't have the big London banks and corporations to lavish sponsorship on their theatres and concert halls as a substitute for local authority and central government funding. They express real anxiety about how they can keep going with everything cut to the bone. As knife crime rightly concerns us all, the closure of early intervention services that think about a generation, notably Sure Start centres, has to raise questions about how you can prevent when we know prevention is always cheaper, not just in cash terms, but yes, in cash terms too, than late attempts to turn things around. Close to where I live, 31 children's centres in Surrey are earmarked for closure. The biggest issues which I think we'll be talking about include the crisis in homelessness. Local authorities spent nearly £1 billion supporting families into temporary accommodation in the financial year to 2018, with local authorities at the front line of helping the vulnerable, but without the house building on a scale that can meet the problem, and with the ongoing issues of right to buy removing housing stock. Adult social care, always on the news now. New recommendations from the Alzheimer's Society, a growing crisis. How can it be met adequately? Children's services, growing demand. More than 500 protection investigations starting every day. How are these to be funded? Between 2010 and 2020, I've been told by the LGA, local councils will have lost almost 60 pence in every pound of central government funding, and I know that this is felt to be unsustainable. And in the meantime, the daily services that affect our quality of life, the state of the roads, the rubbish collections, the local leisure centre being open, these are often being eroded. So I'm hoping that we'll be having a good discussion about the way ahead, what government can do to help prioritise, and how to achieve a sustainable long-term future for local government funding. So I'm going to introduce the speakers that we have, who will speak for about 5 minutes each, just laying out what they see as the challenges and the way ahead. We'll be hearing shortly from Baroness Kath Pinnock, who's a Lib Dem peer. She's a former teacher, and she's also been a member of Kirklees Borough Council before joining the House of Lords. But first, Adebowale, who's a crossbench peer with extensive experience in housing associations and as a senior figure in the charity sector, supporting vulnerable homeless people, including at Centrepoint and the Alcohol Recovery Project. Over to you.
Okay. God, when you just read out a litany of disaster, it felt like there's no hope. I am the chief executive of an organisation called Turning Point. It is true, I have spent most of my career dealing with people at the sharp end of the inverse care law, that law that states that those people in need of services the most tend to get them the least. So I guess my organisation, Turning Point, which is a social enterprise, works with, 300 local authorities. We look after about 83,000 people, covering mental health, learning disabilities, substance misuse. I spend a lot of my time travelling around the country, and no doubt I've visited many of your local areas in my time. And I guess what I want to say is a bit of my perception of what's happening in reality, and hopefully we can have a conversation. The first thing I want to say is that I don't believe that we're saving money. I think that what we're doing is kicking the can down the road, and I'll explain to you why I think that is. And I understand the short-term pressures on local authorities to save money in now, but I also understand the consequences of that on individuals, on individual need, and therefore the cost that actually occurs next year, the year after, and indeed it happens generationally. Turning Point, when we look at our services, when we look at what we provide across learning disabilities, substance misuse, and mental health, what we see are the withdrawal of core services that mean that many of the challenges that we talk about in the press actually get worse. So I'll give you an example, and I actually did a study for the Mayor a few years ago on knife crime in London, and it's been interesting to note that there's been a 68% increase in knife crime in England and Wales, and we know that in that same period, youth services have been cut by 40%. Indeed, in some local authorities, they've been cut by 91%. And the analysis by the APPG on knife crime has found that the areas with the largest cuts in youth spending have seen the biggest increases in knife crime. And I can tell you, I haven't got the time, but I can go into detail as to exactly why that is. I mean, into forensic detail, if you wish, as to exactly why that is and the impacts of that. And that's why I say we're actually kicking the can down the road. You mentioned the number of referrals to children's services has increased by 100,000 in a decade, and child protection plans, according to the department, the DfE, have gone up by 23,000, an 84% increase. And children have got this nasty habit of growing up into adults. And I can draw you a direct line, I can draw you a lifeline between children in care and not the at-risk register and prison, alcohol misuse, low education attainment, and additional cost. I can tell you, I can draw you the line. It's not something that's a mystery. We all know. We look at substance misuse. Councils have cut spending on drug and alcohol services by 15.5% between 13-14 and 17-18. And there's been a 7% fall in numbers of people accessing treatment in the same period. Now, we know that alcohol, I spent 6 years on the board of NHS England. I always joke that when I started, my beard was full and black, and we know that in that same period, the alcohol-related admissions have risen by more than 2/3. Now, those people go into hospital, they also come out, and they get old, and they have multiple morbidities. And the average active life of a woman in Barking and Dagenham is 53. Now, those people are going to be using your services more, and they're going to be using NHS services more, and that cost is built in. Now, that can be prevented, but we don't. Those cuts, withdrawal of those services. I'll give you one example just to illustrate my point. Absolutely. In the Midlands, where we provide learning disability and mental health services, forensic services, there's one case that springs to mind. A chap who has mental health and complex needs, looked after by his father. His father dies, he moves to his brother's house. At the same time, his day centre closes and the withdrawal of family support occurs, and the only support he can get is on the other side of the city, which costs several bus rides away. So he doesn't get a service. His mental health deteriorates. He ends up in a psychiatric ward, and then we look after him. We're a social enterprise, so you end up paying for our services. Now, that particular individual he could have been supported in the community far cheaper than the psychiatric ward and the consequences of that. And there's one more thing. When you look at our forensic step-down services, where we have 7 in 12 of our clients in those services have used food banks, and they will tell you that the universal credit system is part of the challenges that they face. Let me end by saying 3 things. Local government it's not just a nice to do, it's essential to the welfare of the social infrastructure of this country. I believe that, I've witnessed it, I know it. You are at the edge of what you can do in relation to innovation and partnerships with organisations like ours. You need more freedom to innovate locally, that's absolutely true. But ultimately, unless the spending review recognises the hollowing out of the social infrastructures that you are responsible for, then everyone suffers and we don't save any money. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
That's good. Thank you.
Right, Baroness Pinnock, over to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to start by just explaining a bit that I'm still a councillor, a local council in Kirklees, which is a large authority in Yorkshire, West Yorkshire. And I've been a councillor for 30 plus years, including a period as council leader. So I'm on the front line of what is happening to local government. And the first thing I would say, which is, obviously it's really close to my heart, is local government and local democracy and local public services. And why is it so important to me, and I hope to you? Because for me, local government is the glue that holds our community together, provides the support, provides the opportunities, provides the sort of well-being that communities need if they are going to flourish, and the individuals need if they are going to flourish. And the trouble now is, as those of us who've been on the campaign trail in the last month or so I've heard, is that people and communities are not happy places. And they're not happy places, not just because of the national stuff, because for 10 years it feels as if by cut, drip, 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 the services on which they have relied and on which they love are being taken away. No one cares, is how they tell me that tale. And of course, it's not those who are best able to look after themselves who suffer, it's those who are least able to look after themselves who suffer when that is the case. So, we know from National Audit Office reports and the LGA's own reports that local government finance has been slashed in half, basically. Viability is of concern to local government auditors. It's real, what we're facing. It's a real problem. So, what am I particularly concerned about in local government, apart from this glue that holds it all together? So every bit of what local government does is important. The standout stuff is the things that you will know, which is care for older people. I know in my authority that the local authority only provides care for those who are in the most critical need. That's where the care goes. Everybody else has to rely on volunteers, neighbours, whatever. And it's exactly what we've just heard, is that if you do that, the problems become critical more quickly and therefore more expensive. And the demands on the NHS come more often and more quickly, and obviously with the consequence of the pressures on NHS services. So it's a false economy. The next one is, and by the way, how many years have we been waiting for the social care green paper? I think we're on to is it 2.5 years? Could be 3 years. And where is it? And there's no solution until the government shows its hand. And I don't think it'll be any time soon, personally. The next one is children's services, which I think actually is the crisis for local government. It is the issue that will cause local authorities to tip over and have a sort of Northamptonshire issue. Because as more and more children are having care orders and requiring expensive provision of care by local authorities, and the reason is that the children's or Sure Start centres have been closed. So that early intervention has been taken away, and families get into crisis, and then the consequence is clear for us all to see. And then I'll mention just one, or perhaps I could go on for a long time. One more, maybe. Public health. You know, it's got quite a boring title, actually, but it's important. And ever since it's been passed to local authority governance, it has had its funding cut. And within that package of public health comes stuff like drug and alcohol prevention services. And guess what's happening with county lines and increasing problems of drug dealers and drug trafficking within communities. And the reason is on one hand, the cuts in public health, and on the other, the cuts in policing and local policing. And as for young people's services, I'm sad to say this, my own council does no longer have a young people service because it's not a statutory service, so it can be cut. So then I think we get on to solutions.
But solutions are important, yes.
Yeah, solutions, well, potential solutions. I mean, I could have mentioned, as I should have done, housing crisis and crisis in heritage, actually. Libraries and museums and heritage buildings, civic buildings that are seen as, that's ours. And the council is having to sell it, or trying to sell it, maybe. And that's taking away from a community the visible symbol of what it means to be part of that community. And councils who do that, I think, from my point of view, with deep regret. So the solutions. Government has to play a part in recognising that you can't have local government and public services that keep communities together on a shoestring. That has got to end. So they have to, in the spending review, come up with some more resources. Secondly, I think we've got to put back the local into local government. And if you look at any other provision of local services, public services across Europe, dare I say that word, Europe, you will see that there is much more flexibility, much more local control than local government has here. And that enables people to find solutions for their own communities. And obviously, as a Liberal Democrat, that is at the heart of what I believe. That people, if you give them the chance, they'll find the solutions. But you have to give them the money as well. And I'm nearly finished. Honest. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, everybody knows, we've got to look at prevention. Because if early prevention not only saves local public spending, but it enhances lives. Why wouldn't you do that if it enables people to live at home, safe and well? Why wouldn't you do that if it enables young people who are going off the rails to get back off the rails? Why wouldn't you? Because these are people's lives we're talking about. And so for me, it's put the local back into local government, make the government understand the importance of what we do as local politicians and local authorities, and break away from this local authorities are just there as delivery arms for central government. It is not acceptable. Give us a chance, we can solve these problems, but you have to give us the cash as well.
Thank you. I know that when the Minister gets to those questions, we'd all like to ask about central government money. But I thought, as she's not here yet, I thought it might be quite useful. I wanted to ask one question, or two very practical questions, and perhaps partly get some responses from all of you and further questions. And one is, in a short-term attempt to deal with the fact there is this cash shortfall, what do people feel about the idea of, and it was an LGA recommendation, I think, in its own green paper on adult social care, an increase in taxation or a social care premium? I mean, as a short term, we need to do something and we need to find money.
We do. Well,
is that something to be considered?
Oh, yeah. Liberal Democrats are upfront about it. We're proposing a penny on income tax to raise at least some of the funding, because it won't solve the problem, even one penny on the income tax, but it will provide, I'm dredging from my memory, £4 billion a year, I think. Somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong. To enable funding to go into social care. That's just the starter, though. What do you think, Lord?
Well, there's an £8 billion gap, or there will be an £8 billion gap in council funding by 2025. You fill that gap, you just keep things the same. That's not improving services. Ultimately, you get what you pay for, and we've had a situation where several, not just this government, several governments have managed to convince people that you can have a low tax and great services. You can't. I think we need to do two things. One, we need to look at how we design adult social care services. I think doing the same thing with the same money isn't the best way. With more money, actually, I don't think is great value. But ultimately, we need to increase taxation, and we need to look at the design of how we provide adult social care services.
Fantastic. And the Minister joins us now. Thank you very much.
Hi, nice to see you.
Truss.
Hello.
So just to bring up to speed, we've sort of been discussing the challenges and the kind of great concern that local authority funding has been cut to the bone, and national government really has to change the way it sort of treats these priorities. And this whole idea about early intervention being more important than trying to fix things late. So knife crime, for example, comes after children who might have been getting interventions through short start centres are now not getting that support, and it takes years to see the effect of it. Perhaps you'd like to give us your thoughts. I know you're going to speak for
Great.
5 minutes, and then we can take some questions and discussion.
Fantastic. So we're now in a position after 9 years of being in government where we have had tough decisions to be made, and I know local government has done a lot of work in terms of becoming more efficient. What we've also done is we've rebalanced taxation. So more money that is spent locally is now raised locally. I think that's a good thing, because that means that local government leaders are accountable to their local populations. But what I'm very keen to do now is make sure we look forward into the new period. So we're currently working on the spending review. The plan is to launch the spending review process just before the summer recess. That will be completed in the autumn, and that will set budgets in an ideal world from 2020 to 2023. And what I want to make sure is, first of all, that we're driving economic growth, because if we get growth up, That means both more money in people's pockets, reduced cost of living, but what it also means is more tax in the coffers that mean we can fund public services. So I just came in for the end of the comments from Lord Adebowale. I think what he was saying about taxation I wouldn't entirely agree with, because I think overall it's important we keep taxes relatively low. We allow businesses to keep more of their own money, but we make sure we spend public money in a way that is most efficient. And local authorities, for me, are absolutely key for delivering that. Some of the major challenges we face in terms of boosting economic growth, getting more housing, getting more affordable housing, making our planning system work better. And that's working better for local councillors, local people, as well as the country as a whole. I've been a local councillor and sat on a planning committee, and I can tell you that a lot of the time I spent on that committee was not efficiently used. I think we can do things in a much better way. And if we look at housing and planning, we're currently spending 34 billion on a combination of housing benefit, but also money we're putting through various different schemes to boost housing supply. And if we're able to make housing more affordable, that not only makes it better for all of the population, and we know what a struggle it is for people to afford housing, particularly in London. The average person who rents is paying 50% of their income in rent. But it also makes it more affordable for the public sector too. So I think by increasing the housing supply, we can both benefit the public purse and we can also help economic growth. I think that's an extremely important area. The second area I would talk about is education. And this is where I do agree with the comments about early intervention. What we know is that the early years of people's lives are incredibly important. And if a child gets to age 11 not able to read and write properly, not able to do maths properly, it really is difficult after that to help those children. And we do recognise that there is more funding needed in areas like special educational needs, in areas like children's services, where we did put more money in at the last budget. And that's something I'm looking at in the spending review, because what I don't want to see is, because rightly councils are spending money on special educational needs, which they absolutely need to. We've seen a rise in demand. I don't want to see that squeezing the schools' budget, because we know that schools are under pressure. We know that they've seen rising costs. So particularly in those lowest funded authorities, we're looking at what we can do to raise the base rate of funding. How can we make sure that schools are properly funded, and also that we are able to provide for those children with special educational needs, that they have the support they need. So that's something that is a real priority for the spending review. And over the last few weeks and months, I've been travelling around the country, asking people in various businesses, various places of work, what their priorities are for public spending. And education comes out pretty near top of the list, as does the health service. So I completely recognise that's a priority. But what I also think we need to do is make sure when we do allocate more resources to schools and we do allocate more resources to these areas, that we're also doing more to support parents, particularly working parents who might need to go out to work, have that support in terms of childcare. And I think schools can do a lot. And many schools in my area are doing this, opening longer hours, having childcare support on the school premises. So to me, it is about, of course, it's about resources. That's what we're all here talking about today. But it's also about what we do with those resources and how do we get best value for money out of all of those public assets we've all invested in over the years. And the final point I wanted to make on economic growth is infrastructure. And what we know, what will drive economic growth most? Well, it is local transport. It's people being able to get to work. It's people being able to have a home near where they work, and it's people being able to get to work. So we're doing a zero-based capital review. We're going to continue to be spending a significant amount on infrastructure, a 40-year high in terms of economic infrastructure, but we want to make sure that's focused on where is going to maximise the opportunities for people, where is going to maximise the economic growth. So those are some of the issues I'm looking at in the spending review. And quite often people will say to me, well, Liz, you know, you're saying that this area might need a bit of extra funding or that area might need an extra funding. doesn't that mean we need to raise taxes? But there are an awful lot of areas of government spending which the public don't prioritise, where there are inefficiencies and where there are opportunities to get better value for money. I could highlight one area of business support where we currently spend £18 billion a year supporting businesses in various different ways. Some of those go to larger businesses who often have the people who are able to apply for grants and so on. I think that's an area we could simplify and we could get better value for money. And again, I mentioned the housing budget earlier is somewhere where I think if we are able to build more houses, if we're able, particularly in our cities, able to build on some sites which are hitherto we haven't allowed building, we can actually make the cost more affordable and we can save money in the public purse. But it's great to be here today, participating, and very happy to answer any questions people might have.
I think we should take questions very shortly. I've just got 3 to follow up things that you've just been saying. So you were talking about more affordable housing. One of the big concerns that emerges is that, on the one hand, right to buy means that local authorities can't replenish the stock the way they would because they can only retain a certain percentage of the sale. And help to buy is putting money into the pockets of commercial house builders and keeping prices high. And none of this actually seems to be doing much to answer homelessness. So do you need to rethink your approach?
Well, we do have an issue with homelessness, and the government is taking this extremely seriously. The point I would make overall is it's about the supply of housing. We simply have not built enough houses in this country.
Could local authorities be doing that and freed up to do more?
Yeah, and we have. I mean, we've raised the local authority housing borrowing cap, so local authorities are able to do more of that. That is something we did at the last budget. We are giving more freedom to local authorities, but it doesn't alter the fundamental issue, which is about the supply of land. And if you compare us to a country like Germany, Germany has just built many more houses for years and years. If you look at Japan and Tokyo, houses are much more affordable in Tokyo because they've allowed much more building. Okay. And I'm not saying, by the way, that we should build on every greenfield in England, but I am saying in places like London, we should allow more building upwards. We need to densify our city, and we need to allow towns and villages across the country to expand incrementally. At the moment, the planning system is quite cumbersome. If a village wants a few extra houses every year, it can be a massive
LGA's
headache.
figures suggest that they're passing most planning applications.
But that's true, and this is certainly no criticism of local government. But if you look at a country like Germany that has a zoning system, once you have those zones in place, then the builder can proceed without going through yet more process. And I think we should have a horses for courses approach. I think we should trial different approaches in different areas. But I don't think you can get away from the fact that the fundamental problem in this country is simply we haven't built enough houses, and we haven't built enough houses in the right place, particularly in London and the South East. And I'm a member of Parliament in Norfolk, and what I see is prices rising in Norfolk, and it's a kind of wave effect coming out from London because London is so expensive. It's having a wave effect on the wider South East and East.
Why don't we open it up to questions? Let's take questions on this issue of homes, then we can move on to others. Yes. And if you could wait for the microphone, say who you are and where you're from. Thank you.
While we're waiting.
The issue of homelessness, I wanted to address more fundamentally
Go for it.
the issues.
Could you tell us your name and where you're from?
My name's David Finch. I'm the leader of Essex County Council. Essex, my first request is one about certainty of funding from government in terms of clarity around infrastructure funding, also flexibilities in terms of some of the charges that we have to adhere to are out of date. And indeed, some of the comments from the panel, I would say, are out of date as well. And I would say this for the reason that Children's Services in Essex is rated as outstanding, and it's probably the lowest cost children's service in this country. Our youth service has the highest number of children now operating and using youth services, where the grants have been reduced from 12 million down to 3 million. We have more activity with people, young people, in our youth service because it's tailored to the needs of those young people as well. So I think there are many ways in which we in local government can actually help and transform services. But I'll come back to my first point. In order for us to transform services, We need certainty of funding, we need clarity about infrastructure funding, and we need freedoms and flexibilities to adjust the charges that we make within our local areas. It's okay to say, increase your council tax. Equally well, let's look at the charges that we make and flex those charges as well.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Quick response from...
Well, I don't think I think we're in violent agreement, actually, on most of what you've said. I pointed out a statistic from the PPG on knife crime, which did equate the reduction in costs, cuts in youth services with increases in knife crime. And the fact is that in some local authorities, youth services have been cut by 91% and generally 40%. I commend Essex because you've invested not just time and money in your youth services. I was in Essex the other day, actually. So, the exception proves the rule. It doesn't change the facts, though. By the way, might I just on the housing point? I think there's a couple of things. I find it astonishing, actually. I mean, the government's been in power since 2008. The notion that we 2010 rather, the discovery that we need to build more housing seems a little late. I think local authorities. Things like local authorities approving 9 in 10 planning applications, and they're at an all-time high. You can't flex stupid things like not being able to get planning.
Well, there's huge
fees locally set.
Into offices that are
the notion of affordability, which needs to be changed. In London, affordability is 80% of market. Nobody can afford it. And you talk about Germany. In Germany, actually, the rents are set. So that I just think
there is also now a higher rate of home ownership amongst young people in Germany than there is in the UK, and that's been a reversal. And it is because of the sheer amount and the flexibility in their system. And we have been increasing the amount of houses we built every year. We're now at it's almost a 31-year high, but I recognise that's not enough. And as a government minister, I'm not going to sit here and say the government has been perfect and there's nothing we can do better. I'm saying explicitly, I think we ought to be opening up more land to build more houses. And you made the point about planning permissions, but you can only get planning permissions on land that is available to...
You've made clear your emphasis on this point. I'd like to open it up to other concerns that people here have. So if you have a concern that you'd like to put to the Minister or anyone else, go for it. Tell us your name and where you're from.
I did want to come back on that certainty of funding point, by the way.
Well, why don't you do that first, Minister?
Sorry, I wanted to answer that point.
Yes.
So we are working at the moment on the basis of a 3-year spending review. I think that will be extremely helpful in terms of giving certainty to all kinds of public bodies. So I'm getting the same requests from schools, for example, as I am from local government. And we do need to recognise that local government needs more freedom to do things differently. There are different challenges in different parts of the country. I fully support that idea. We're also looking at the obligations we place on local government and the things we ask local government to do that we shouldn't necessarily need to do. And I think there has been a welcome change in this country to a more positive approach to devolution of power. And I think we need to continue to go in that direction. I think we need to devolve more services. And I think we do have to accept that services are going to be delivered in different ways in different parts of the country. And that is a good thing, because councils can learn from each other and local people have more say over their own services.
Right. Go for it. And then could we get the other microphone to the person further back?
Thank you. James Jamison, leader of Central Bedfordshire and also at the LGA. Liz, you missed the earlier bit, but there was an awful lot of talk about investment in prevention effectively, giving us a long-term saving. And I really have sort of two parallel questions. One for the first two correspondents. If we invest in prevention, completely agree with you, we will save huge amounts of money in the health service and the police and other things. Now, that's actually about resource allocation, and it's actually saying we should take more money and spend it on prevention and not on cure. So would you be in favour of top-slicing the 20 billion for the NHS and giving it to local government and other prevention services? Certainly, I think that would be value for money. A slightly more complex
Could you be in favour, because if it's more complex, can we get this one answered?
It's the same question.
All right, go on then,
which is,
briefly.
actually, if the local government is prepared to invest in prevention services, how do we extract the money that other parts of government and society save to pay back that money?
Thank you very much. Right, who'd like to take that first? Do you want to go ahead, Minister?
Well, we're looking at this at the moment in terms of how can we spend money best so it boosts opportunity, and which programmes have been successful at doing that and which programmes haven't been successful at doing that. And I always believe it's best to try and sort things out as close to the issue as possible, and councils are in a brilliant position to do that. One of the issues I think governments have is that we end up with lots of different funding streams, and a lot of people in government can spend their time applying for the money rather than getting on and doing the job. So there's a huge job of simplification to be done as well, and accountability. But fundamentally, I think you're right. I think it is about early intervention, and it's about making sure that, and this is my point about devolving more things, for example, the public health grant is an area where we could, I think, get more value in the future.
Thank you. Could I also welcome Anneliese Dodds, Shadow Minister to the Treasury. Thank you so much. I know it's been a complicated day in the House, so thank you. I wondered if you'd heard enough of that question to want to respond straight away to it. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I'm very, very sorry that I'm late. Clearly Liz's whips are a little bit gentler than mine, so I do apologise. I was stuck inside the House of Commons. I think, first of all, I would say that in practice we do have an evidence base behind many of the kinds of preventative interventions already, and yet even with that evidence base we've seen many of them being cut back really quite severely over recent years. So, for example, if people look at smoking cessation services and what's happened across the UK, that's been very marked. In terms of whether we would be wanting to wire funds between different parts of the healthcare budget, I mean, in theory, we're meant to have that integrated approach already, with health overview and scrutiny committees, for example, meant to be bringing together those actors. It's not really working properly at the moment. And personally, I think a big part of the reason for that is that there's so extreme rationing around many services,
and
actually.
We should say as well that part of the concern was about the kind of prevention services in, sort of with young people that have a big social impact, but local authorities don't have the money to kind of claim back against what they're saving society at large.
Yes, they don't. And just finally, I would add on that actually what we do need as well is to have a longer-term perspective for government in assessing the value of this kind of spending. Even when we're looking at the spending review, and I'm sure you've already covered this, we don't exactly know when it's going to be happening, etc., but that's looking at 3 years potentially. We need to have a longer-term perspective than that, because otherwise we won't be able to properly incorporate the future value of those interventions and current spending. So that's certainly something that we're doing within the Shadow Labour Treasury team, is working out how we could have that long-term perspective to properly put these kind of measures into place. I mean, some of the interventions that I see, for example, they're for 12 months, 2 years. You can't possibly see the impact over that shorter period.
Baroness Pinnock, do you both want to comment and then I'll take the
Yeah, one of the challenges for local government is we always see it through our own eyes, through our own experience. And what we do know is that across the country, local councils have very, very different experiences in terms of their resourcing. So some of the northern Mets are seriously under-resourced now, for example. So we do have to sort of try and think of the whole and being some of very different parts. Then, in response to this question, the challenge, I think, for social care, children's services, children's mental health services, all that gamut of social care issues, and it's how it butts up against the health services. The one is funded locally through health and wellbeing boards. There is a collaboration, but not a funding. So the funding streams for NHS, which is centrally controlled, centrally run, and here we have local government with its separate budgets, and ne'er the twain shall meet. And what we could do is try and make greater local democracy for the health and social care and children's services. That could bring huge benefits in terms of funding and of benefit to the individuals who will get the services they need. Yes, please.
So, 3 things quickly. First is, I agree, local's better, and there's some evidence for that. More local because you understand you understand what you're commissioning. Commissioning meaning the understanding of needs of an individual such that you can build an appropriate platform for procurement. So local's better. However, not all places are the same, and obviously, and particularly this is in some local authorities have different economic landscapes and different demographies, and that actually will impact on the amount they can raise through business rates and all kinds of things, which is why we have a central government structure in the first place, to try and even things out as opposed to the look of the draw. But your specific question about the NHS, I think that and if you look at the 10-year plan, the 20 billion that's in there, which by the way, I think everybody knows will keep the NHS stable. It's not a 20 billion that's going to extra. It's a stability fund, effectively. But within that plan, there is a clear push for population health, which you can't do without a partnership between local government and the NHS. And I have pushed for that, was on the board, and I push for it now. And when you go around the countries, I do, you see the successful local authorities. It's not actually about who's got the budget. I think it's whether you can develop an accountable joint relationship between health and social care that holds you both responsible for the health and welfare of the population. Because at the end of the day, as a taxpayer, and by the way, a businessman, I actually think that I get very poor value for my tax when I walk past a homeless person or a person with alcohol problems who I know is going to cost me a lot more in not just in months but in days than it would have been if the substance misuse services had been in place in the first place. So it can be done. If you look at some local authorities have done this, developed strong relationships between health and social care, sharing the budget, and built in the work of the third sector, and look at how you measure prevention. One more thing, I do think that local government should benefit from the savings that you make from preventative services. That involves a different kind of formula relationship between local government and national government, which I think should be supported. Prevention's the future.
Absolutely. Just before we take the next question, I want to ask a really simple thing that a lot of people wonder. Should the government be extending business rates to online retailers to try and offset the demise of the local high street?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Should local authorities, it'll have to come from legislation, should business rates be extended to online retailers to offset the demise of the local high street? We know how local businesses are struggling with
I think we should continue to be reducing business rates. I think
but
business
not
rates...
online businesses more.
No, I think that we've got lots of successful online businesses in this country, and many of them are based in buildings that have to pay business rates. I think it's wrong to just penalise a particular type of business because they're new.
No, it's not.
But I do think, I think
all the local businesses, which this is a really big issue.
but there are local businesses that are online. There are businesses.
But the businesses that are paying business rates based on premises.
I know,
based
but lots
on
of online
official
businesses
rates
have premises as well, is what I'm saying. And I'm agreeing with you, and I do think there is an issue with business rates. We reduced a lot of business rates by 33% of the budget. I think we need to do more on that. But my view on business taxation is it should be as simple as possible, and it should apply to all businesses in an equal way. There should be a level playing field. But I think just to say we've got a not very good tax here, let's lop it on everybody, isn't the way to encourage businesses.
It's about the lack of funding locally. Who has the microphone?
It's not. I'm sorry. It's not about the lack of funding locally.
That's
what
it is
people
about feel in local authorities.
Can I finish?
Yeah, go on, everyone.
What the government has done over the past few years is say, we will reduce central funding and make local government reliant on business rates and council tax. So if you are now saying we, central government, are going to reduce business rates, somebody tell me what's going to happen to local authorities. That's the question. And personally, I think the likes of Amazon and all the rest of them should be paying their share. They're benefiting from the roads that people, the local government has to maintain and build. They benefit from the other services that are provided through street cleaning and all the rest of it. So why shouldn't they pay their share? It's outrageous.
They absolutely should pay tax. I'm not saying that at all, and there have been various issues which we are dealing with. But I think fundamentally we do have a relatively high rate of business property tax in this country, and I don't think that is helpful. And I think we need to look at local government funding in the round. Where's the money coming in terms of the central government grant, council tax, other money that can be raised locally, and make sure local government is sustainable. Okay. And my job is to make sure local government is sustainable, that it's able to raise that money locally, that it has more freedoms. I also support things like the new homes bonus, which actually gives councils the ability to get more funding by building more homes, which is a massive priority.
We'll come back to that later. I just want to get response from everyone else on this issue, because it's a really simple one.
But it isn't that simple. It really isn't that simple. That's what I'm saying.
To be fair, Minister, you've expressed very clearly your view on it. Can I just take Lord Adebowale and then...
Well, the problem is that the nature of business has changed dramatically over in a 10, 15-year period, and to you know, if you keep doing the same thing and get the same results, it's one of the definitions of, let me just say, it's not going to work. And the fact of the matter is, this is a fact that might not. Turning points of social enterprise. The top 5 social enterprises in this country pay more taxes to the exchequer than Google, Facebook, Apple, and Twitter put together. Now, I just think that's bizarre. Now, I don't care what the notion of taxation is, but it should respond to the landscape of modern business. And to say that, to argue that that shouldn't be the case, which is what I'm hearing, makes no sense at all. And just one more thing: if you happen to be in a local authority that doesn't have the benefit of a major headquarters for all kind of reasons, what do you do?
Absolutely.
Anneliese.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think in technical terms, you can't just extend business rates to cover all the profit or revenue of companies that are based on clicks, as it were, rather than bricks. But there is now an enormous gap in terms of the taxation of those firms that are intensive in terms of their use of our high streets and of the physical geography, as against those companies that largely have an internet presence. And that's been exacerbated by the cuts that we've seen, of course, recently to corporation tax. And when I talk to business, overwhelmingly they say our biggest concern is those business rates. It is not corporation tax, which of course you only pay once you're making a profit. So we've said we need to take that bold decision. We've got to be honest about it, that we need to reverse some of that recent change to corporation tax, because it hasn't increased business investment. In fact, business investment has been going down rather than up. But in terms of what else we need to do, we need to have a proper review of local taxation, because what's been happening, and even this discussion just now has reflected it, in many local authorities, and people here will know this as councillors, you have become increasingly reliant on council tax and business rates, and the amount of revenue support grant is virtually minuscule in many areas, and in fact on trend to completely disappear. Now, that's fine if you've got predictable revenue streams, but if you've got a population which already finds it difficult to pay council tax, and you don't have loads of firms knocking down your door to situate themselves in your area, then you are in trouble, and your services are in trouble, and those costs are not flexible, and your revenue is not possible to be increased either at a local level. So we've got to focus on that sustainability, and that needs a proper review of that local taxation.
Right, let's take 2 questions. The gentleman with the microphone, and then I'm trying to keep gender balance. If there are any ladies who'd like to ask questions, could you put yourself in? Because it's a nice thing. I just will try and alternate. So I'd like to get the other microphone to the lady there, and then I'll come to the gentleman just in front. You go ahead.
Thank you.
Nice and concise questions, and name and where you're from, please.
Okay. And Andrew Hardingham. I'm an officer amongst members here today, so I feel a little bit sort of isolated. But anyway, my task as the finance director to try and make sense of all this finance on my local authority and to advise my elected members. And my question is around the point you made about certainty. And I'd just like to give you a few figures from Plymouth
briefly,
in the southwest. Our RSG has been cut on average £5 million a year. And at the moment of the current financial settlement, the RSG we get this year is 9 million, but I've got no certainty as to what we're going to get next year. So how do I advise my members? 0, 9 or 5? We get improved better care fund money around about £9 million. We get one-off social care grants of £4 million. We get new homes bonus, and that is staying around constant despite all the tweaks to the system of around £4 million. What is the certainty around that funding? There's potentially 21, 22 million pounds there at risk. How do I advise my members? We have spending pressures of £6 million on children per year for the last 3 years. That's 6 plus 6 plus 6. What's the forecast for the next period? Our adults is the same. We're given permission to raise tax locally to fund adult social care. We don't get central government grant, we get permission to raise local tax. 20% of our taxpayers are on benefits. The amount of money that I can raise is £3 million maximum through council tax. So add those numbers up, I've got about a £36 million cost and the ability to raise £3 million. A spending review that comes with its conclusions in the autumn doesn't give me any help whatsoever in advising members for their budget that they would have to set around Christmas time. Please can I have some certainty? Please can we have some help?
Thank you, Minister, because I think that's one of the big concerns.
Yes, and we've got now to the end of a 4-year local government settlement period. We're now looking into the next period. And what I'm saying is I do recognise the pressures in the system. That's what we're looking at to make sure that local government finance remains sustainable over the next period. And just on this point about taxation, I do agree in the future we should look at devolving parts of income tax or parts of VAT. There was a very good paper by the IFS recently suggesting devolving 3p of income tax to local areas. I think that's a very interesting idea. I agree that the council tax base is not a great, it's not a broad enough base. But I think we've got to be realistic about where we can get to in the next 3 years with the various tools that we've got at the moment. And what I want to make sure is we're giving messages to local authorities as early as possible. That's why we're launching the spending review very shortly to be able to do that. And the other point I wanted to make is there is redistribution within the system. I think it's right that we've moved from a system that was predominantly central government funded, but local government made decisions, to a system now where local government raises a lot of money, although there is redistribution between local authorities and those spending decisions are made locally. But I think the challenge we've got is we do need to move to a different system of local government finance. We do need to look at the devolution of some of these national taxes. We're still a very centralised country in Britain compared to a lot of other countries around the world, and I don't think that's a good thing. I think it'd be better if we were more devolved and localised. But the next 3 years is going to be about more of a transition about how we get there.
Okay, thank you. Who was the lady with the microphone? Have you got
yes.
it? Yes.
Thank you.
And then the other microphone can come to the gentleman just in front of you.
My name is Donna Cornell and I'm leader of Stroud District Council. My question is around, you made the comment about driving economic growth, and our council is one of many, and it's growing all the time, that's declared a climate emergency, has as Parliament recently. And what I want to ask you about is what will that economic growth look like? And obviously the government has got some very demanding targets to reach about bringing down carbon emissions.
Yes.
And local government is going to have to do the heavy lifting to deliver on that. So at the moment, basically, councils like mine are allocating resources to it under a lot of pressure as well, and support from our local communities. But is there going to be some joined-up thinking around that, and maybe start to think there is a role for government to play, and the funding will come? It's not about us having to go and make individual bids if we want to put electric vehicle charging points in, for example, but actually to recognise that, because I think it's not going to happen unless local government delivers for you. And I think I'd welcome, within the spending review, a recognition of that role that we'll play, and how that will be sort of, obviously, the resources will need to come alongside it.
Thank you. Yeah. Minister first, and then Anneliese Dodds, and anyone else. Go ahead.
Do you want to go? So you're right. We need to bake these things into what we do right across government. In the new Green Book we released last year for Treasury assessments, for the first time we've got natural capital and how we assess that as part of the way we assess investment decisions. And of course that needs to apply to areas like housing, it needs to apply to areas like planning, and it needs to apply to what local government does. So it's very much a lens through which we're looking at things as part of the spending review.
Thank you. Anneliese Dodds, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, just very, very briefly on the issue around kind of devolved finances. I mean, of course, there are other countries which have this, but if you look at, say, the German situation, where they had a national debate for many, many years about how the federal financing was going to work, and they created a smoothing mechanism. Now, the problem is we don't have any clarity about what that smoothing mechanism is going to look like, at the same time as we're moving headlong towards a series of different pilots around retention of business rates, etc. My concern about it is the risk that places on different local authorities, just as was summed up, I think, by the gentleman from Plymouth. Around the issue on the environment, I couldn't agree with you more that this is going to be delivered by local authorities. Actually, when I look at the Green Book, I notice things like the fact that current consumption is valued as better and more important in financial terms than future consumption. We've got to change that. We have got to rewire the system from the level of the Green Book right through all of our mechanisms within the Treasury and elsewhere. And we also need to stop preventing local authorities from taking environmental action. You know, it wasn't so long ago that local authorities were being told they couldn't have fortnightly bin collections. We were being told in my city, for example, that we couldn't move ahead as quickly as we wanted to with having clean air zones because they didn't agree with the measures that we were using. We seem to be getting to a better place, but we should be facilitating local authorities to take those kinds of measures rather than blocking them and trying to control this all the time.
Thank you. Lord Adebowale.
Well, just very quickly, I mean, a couple of things. One, I'm really concerned about inequality. Call me old-fashioned, but I think we should be concerned about it because it costs. If you look at the cost of poor people, just in health and social care terms, going to A&E, according to a study done by York University Centre for Health Economics, the cost to the NHS, and that means to all of us, of that occurring is 4.8 billion a year. That's nearly 25% of the 20 billion. So even if you don't care about the moral injustice, the economic one's outrageous. And that's why it matters that these smoothing mechanisms occur. You can't have it both ways. I mean, the gentleman from Plymouth hit the nail on the head. You know, you have to be able to ensure that you don't have raging inequality between local authorities because of the luck of the draw of where they are and what their economic makeup is. So I'd like to hear more about how we're going to do that. And while I do welcome the government's attention paid to the environment, what we need is a clear target that actually, I'm concerned that we're not doing enough. That's what the concern is. Not that we're not doing anything, it's that it's not enough to deliver this kind of changes that we need for my kids and your kids to live in a healthy world. And I think we need more imagination about how doing more might be economically beneficial, because not doing enough certainly is economically dangerous, as well as dangerous for the health of all of us.
Thank you. Baroness Pinnock.
Yeah, no, I just pick up one element of our climate change emergency, which is transport. About 25% of our CO2 emissions are via transport, and all the other issues that we know about air pollution, air quality that comes from that. And if a government is determined to address climate change, it needs to address transport, modes of transport. And only this year, bus services across the country are being cut because they're not able to be subsidised by local authorities, and we're going back into the same because of cuts in resources. So there are practical things that need to be addressed now if we are going to start addressing climate change, and that is one of them. Well, can I just say
Very briefly,
one
I'd like to get to more
very
questions.
last thing? I am getting fed up of the use of the word devolution. We are not having devolution to local government, we're having delegation to local government, and I will leave it there.
Thank you. Right, here, the gentleman with the glasses.
Yes, thank you,
And
John. My name is John Fuller.
And then I'll come to the gentleman.
I've been to a lot of these things before, and we're very good at articulating the problems as they are today, as we see them day to day. But I thought the object of the spending review, which I know we're talking about, is to try and rebalance spending throughout the entirety of government. And I want the spending review, because we pick up the pieces locally. If there's a young tearaway that we are forced to take into care, frankly, the Ministry of Justice should be picking up the tab for that and paying us to do that, because unless they're incentivised to get their house in order, we'll just pick up the pieces forever. Looked after unaccompanied asylum seekers, and let's DFID as part of our international commitment to development.
Did you say you'd spoken earlier? Can I?
No, I haven't.
You haven't, sorry.
No.
Can I get you to get to the question? Partly
Well,
because
I think
we'll
that
get to
this
the
is
clock,
about
sorry.
rebalancing and getting the responsibility from other departments of state. When failed asylum seekers aren't expelled by the people in Croydon, we pick up the pieces, but we should be sending the bill to the Home Office. And these are the things, this is the rebalancing of the state. And we're very confident about our ability in local government to deliver these things. But I'm looking to the Chief Secretary to actually referee these arguments in the rest of Whitehall, so we just don't pick up the pieces.
Thank you.
And we're paid to do the job.
That's very well
that we
put.
do.
Are you going to referee some of these concerns? It's a very good example, the local authorities that are dealing with large numbers of asylum seekers.
It's a very good point. I spend a lot of time making sure that local authorities do get the resources they need to deal with problems caused by other government departments. I mean, we were talking earlier about children's services and social care being two classic examples of that. I think the next phase, though, and I heard what Baroness said about devolution, but it is devolving some of these responsibilities, so areas like public health, and being clear that that is a responsibility of local
This
government.
question was the reverse. It was about issues which are clearly national issues, but they end up falling on some local authorities unfairly. Are you going to take that
But
message?
the local authorities and the local communities need to get more of the benefits of success. And I think that's the point as well. So if more houses are built, if more businesses are started up, then local authorities need to see more of the proceeds.
Okay. Take this one here, then the lady there, and then the gentleman with the glasses there. Yes.
Bob Kerslake, President of the Local Government Association. I wanted to ask, I hope, a fairly straightforward question. That if we leave aside whether the funding is raised nationally or locally and work on the assumption the responsibilities of local government stay as they are now, do the members of the panel think that local government will need more money in real terms in 3 years, the same amount of money in real terms, or less money in real terms?
Who would like to take that first?
I mean, I'm very happy to take that. I think it's clear that it does need that additional funding. And if I may kind of slightly cheekily relate this to the previous point, actually I think that's because it's not necessarily the case that local government is always just picking up the pieces. It's also doing that preventative work that prevents necessary expenditure in other services. So when we get social care wrong, we see the cost cropping up in GP services and in our hospitals. When we see enormous issues around early intervention, I won't go on about that because it sounds like you've talked about it before, but clearly that has a knock-on impact on so many other areas. And therefore, I think it's a question about whether we can afford not to have change in that area. So certainly we've said that we would have, at the last general election, we did set out additional funds for local government by having different choices around how to raise that revenue, but we would also try and shift towards a more sustainable system for the long term as well. But I think if we stay as we are, I think a lot of the time politicians here in Westminster, they take local government for granted. They don't realise what happens when you strip it right back to the bone. And now in so many areas, even statutory services are a struggle to deliver. So we should not be in a situation where we're questioning whether that spending could be squeezed even further.
Lord Adebowale next.
Well, I have to agree. I mean, local government has been a masterclass in large-scale efficiency savings over a long period of time. And actually, I look at some of the local authorities, and I'm staggered by the amount of money that's been taken out, and still the service is staggering on. But you can't keep doing that. And as I said, I don't think we're saving money. We're just kicking the can down the road. So local government needs more money, but it also needs to continue to show how efficiently it can spend that money. At the moment, I think that central government has taken advantage of the fact that you've kept laying eggs, but that can't go on forever.
Can I just put that to the Minister, because that's the big concern everyone has. After all these years, people feel services are cut to the bone. Do you think there's still more to be cut?
Well, first of all, I can't answer Sir Bob's question directly because I'd be announcing the results of the spending review before it even started, which isn't quite within the sort of Treasury guidance. And I don't think you can divorce the question of what is raised locally from the overall question about the quantum of money, because ultimately all of these services, all of this money that we're funding is provided by taxpayers. And I do believe that the people of Manchester or the people of Norfolk should be able to decide which services they want. So, for example, the police precept has been raised in a lot of areas because people want to see more police on the streets. I think that's right to allow decisions to be made locally.
Don't people
so I
just
would
want the police to be doing a good job everywhere without having to worry about voting for it?
Well,
in the same way they want the hospital down the road.
I disagree. I think we need more local engagement at a local level. I think we need more freedom for local authorities, including freedom to raise money, actually. I think that they should have more freedom to do that. I think we need more powers exercised at a local level. And I want to see more people coming forward to be councillors, more people coming forward to be involved in their local community, and I think that's a really good thing. So I think the more stuff you decide from Whitehall, if you think that there's some technocratic expert in Whitehall that knows best, that can deliver perfect services across the country, I'd love to meet them.
It was about funding
because,
services.
But I think it is, this idea that there is simply a great thing that we can just impose on everything. I don't think that's true. I think we need to allow more things to develop locally.
Okay.
I think that is a good thing.
The lady just there with the mic, and then we'll take everyone's final responses. The lady there, and then there was one other question at the back. That was it. Go for it.
Hello, I'm Sarah Ireland from the Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames. My question goes back to some of the early speeches, which I preached, not all the panel were in the room, about the evidential base that's growing, that one of the victims of funding about prevention and early intervention. And I wondered whether the panel thought that an economic trickle-down kind of impact and effect is really going to make a difference that we need to see in some of the crises we're seeing in our services in children's, and whether we would want a comprehensive spending review to take a more direct approach to how do we fund and rebuild some of the prevention and early intervention, which appears to be diminished.
Thank you. Can I take the other question as well, and then we'll get responses to
Yes, hi, it's Jonathan Owen. I'm Chief Exec of the National Association of Local Councils that represents England's 10,000 parish and town councils. Really pleased that the panel has talked a lot about locality and the activities of local community groups. I'd like to ask you to make sure that that tier, the very smallest tier of local government, is taken full account of in the CSR discussions. It's not just parish and town councils, but community groups too, who can contribute a hell of a lot to resolving some of the problems that we've been discussing tonight. A great example is neighbourhood planning, where communities engage with the planning process, they welcome new houses. We'd like to extend that into economic development too. So I'd really appeal to think about the small guys as well as part of this big debate.
Thank you very much. And then the earlier point being raised about this notion of economic trickle-down. I mean, it comes back to the same issue about there are services that we pay for and the local authorities run, which aren't necessarily measurable, are they? You don't measure the economic cost of knife crime. You just know that people are dying. What are all your thoughts on that comment there about? Do you want to go first, Baroness? Yes, go for it.
Well, can I answer the previous
Answer
question as well,
whichever questions you wish.
which is, you know, there are more cuts coming to local authorities. I know my council is starting to find another, I don't know, £20 million, I think, of cuts next year. So the fact that the thought that there can be more cuts coming is not real. Secondly, the government sets business rates, caps council tax, sometimes says we can raise police precept because maybe you'd want more policing and nobody's going to go against that, are they? So it's all determined nationally, and that is unacceptable if you want to free up local government. So what the obvious answer is, for me, is free local government up. Government has to find more spending for exactly the reasons that were given, because you need to be able to equal out the Hulls, the Hartlepool, south of England. I can't remember any council beginning with H in the south. They will be somewhere.
Haven't.
There you are.
think.
You know, because they're different and not able to raise the same levels of funding. And unless we get government will accept that, we are not going to have a happy ending to this crisis in local authority spending.
Okay, Minister, and then I'll take Anneliese Dodds and then...
So I wanted to talk about this point about early intervention. So I recently visited No Wrong Door, which is a programme for children in care in North Yorkshire. It does a fantastic job. We're now expanding programmes like that to more councils, and you can show that it has had results. You know, the number of children in accident and emergency has gone down, the number of children in trouble with the law has gone down. You know, there are real results delivered from that programme, and As Chief Secretary, I always have to think, when government money is spent, is somebody accountable for that money? Is that money being spent well? And that is something we are constantly looking at. What are the results from this money? And I appreciate some of those results can be extremely long-term. When we look at benefit-cost ratios, we can look at projects over 20 years. We do look long-term. But ultimately, there are ways of seeing, do these things work or don't they work? And we need to constantly be looking at that to see which programmes should we be supporting, or so that local government itself can say which things have worked, which things haven't worked, and try out different and new things across the country. I just wanted to respond to this point about taxation being raised locally. There is redistribution mechanisms between different councils to reflect their economic base, and I think that's right and that's fair. But I think there's a massive problem if you take responsibility for spending money away, from a different set of people who are responsible for raising the taxation. The fact is, we're all paying for these services, and people who... I want local government to be in a position to be held to account for the money they're raising and the services that they're providing by local electors. I think that is the best way to run things. I think you get better services, more effective services if you do that.
Anneliese Dodds, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I mean, I think the reality is, and all of you will know this, that there's far, far less of that redistribution going on now. There is far less of it, and the ability for local authorities to plug the gaps has been reduced significantly. It is extremely hard to grow your business rate income if you're in an economically depressed area. And, you can try very, very hard, but it's extremely difficult to do that. Just very briefly in relation to early intervention. Actually, I think we have got a number of measures, unfortunately. We've got the fact that the number of children going into care has increased very radically. We've also got, for example, the fact that referral to other services is now coming in at a much more severe level than it was before. I mean, for example, my local Home Start is now being referred cases at a much higher level of severity than it ever was before. It's now effectively fulfilling some of the role of traditional social work, I would argue. And that's happening in many, many different parts of the country. So we have actually got some measures there. This isn't an area where we don't know what's happening. But of course, the problem is it's not just about that first starting area. It's also about what happens at the end, where we're seeing, again, around a third of councillors, as I understand it from LGA research, saying that they're concerned their local authority might not be able to sufficiently fulfil its child protection statutory responsibilities. Enormously concerning. And just to finish off, this is about political choice. So, a couple of years ago, at the time of the finance bill back then, the banking levy was cut by £5 billion. We said that was the wrong decision. We said that around half of that funding could and should have gone towards children's services, but it didn't go there. It stayed in a cut to the banking sector. So we can take different political choices around whether we want to fund local services properly or not do so.
Thank you. Lord Adebowale.
Well, I mean, to answer your question, yes, there are going to need to be. I mean, I think the Minister's already referred to some aspects of local government services. SEN, I think, was where you've recognised that actually funding isn't enough, and you're going to have to look at how you're going to... And SEN is just a fractal of a larger service, the education service, which we're seeing off-rolling, which I think personally is a direct result of some of the pressures. So I do think they're going to have to inject money. And the second thing is, you talked about programmes that work, and since you're here, I'll make the advert. Every half hour, somebody leaves Turning Point substance misuse services, drug and alcohol free. 75% of all substance misuse services provided by the third sector that are rated outstanding and provided by Turning Point. Can I have some more money, please?
You can talk about that over drinks. I'm only sorry that we don't have more time. I'd like to thank everyone for coming and speaking so frankly, taking your questions. Thank you for brilliant questions. There is drinks and networking in Smith Square rooms 3 and 4, so do take the chance. And thank you again.
Thank you.